welcome our guest, Martha Bolton, who's presenting to us today on the wonderful book she helped co-write, Bob Hope, Wartime Correspondence with the G.I.s of World War II. Sorry, it's called Dear Bob, Bob Hope's Wartime Correspondence with the G.I.s of World War II. Martha Bolton was Bob Hope's first female staff writer, writing for his television specials, personal appearances, and military shows in the 80s and 90s. She's received nominations for an Emmy Award, Dove Award, a WGA Award, and is the author of over 88 books. And we'll put a link to her books on Amazon, but she writes a lot of great books, especially for people 50 up, and some very entertaining titles. But Martha, we want to thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing this presentation.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and always enjoy talking about Bob Hope. So I've had 15 years of collecting stories. Hopefully we'll have a good time.
All right, there you go, Martha. You should be able to see that and take it away.
Okay, well, I often get asked how I came to write for Bob Hope and how I got into comedy writing. I had been writing for Phyllis Diller and several other comedians. Had started selling to her. If you want to go to that slide, Scott, the first one, there you go. And this is, Phyllis was wonderful. She was a huge encouragement in my writing. This is me in her house on the right. In her wig room. She had a wig room and just for wigs. And then she also had her dresses, her costumes, a whole room for that. And it looked like a store with rows and rows of these outrageous costumes that she was known for. And she was just a wonderful encouragement. When I would send her jokes, she would write in the, off to the side of each one, she'd write different encouraging things, and then she'd send me gifts, and these are some of the notes that she has sent me over the years. And she just, if it wasn't for her, I may have given up. So she was such a great encouragement in my career. And when she started coming on the Bob Hope shows, it was wonderful because I had both of them around, so it was fun to joke with them all. Now what happened was I used to write roasts, and I would roast different friends of mine. They'd want to roast their boss, or I would roast my pastor, and different. Then that opened up doors where I was roasting other pastors, and then all the different businesses around the community. And so that kind of got me into writing a lot of humor. So I wanted to get into script writing for television, for like a sitcom or something. And I had read a book by a gentleman by the name of Gene Parrott, and he was a real, similar to his career was similar to mine, and we both did roast. We both wrote for Phyllis Diller. And so I just wrote him a note, a short letter, and just told him that we had this in common. I didn't ask for anything, but just complimenting his book. And he wrote me back, and then he invited me to a taping of Mama's Family. He was by then the creative consultant on Mama's Family. And he also was a writer for the Carol Burnett Show. So he invited me down to see the show, and I brought this scrapbook that I had all of at the time I was writing a newspaper column and different magazine articles and jokes, of course. And so I had them all in this scrapbook, and I had this poor man sit down and go through this scrapbook after the taping. And we had gone across the street, my husband and I, with him. And so he was real complimentary, and he told me that I should be writing for Hollywood sitcoms. So at the time, I didn't have a typewriter that was working, so it was just broken at that time. And so for a quarter, for 20 minutes, I didn't want to waste any time. So I went down to the local library, and I just kept feeding the typewriter quarters, and I wrote up 2 spec scripts, and then I got it to Gene, and he read them, he liked them, and then he got them to Ed Simmons, who was the producer of Mama's Family. So I got a call from Ed, and he told me that he really liked my work, and the next season was going to call me in to pitch some show ideas for Mama's Family. So I was so excited because you don't get breaks like that all the time. And when what happened after I sent them in, as what happens in Hollywood, this show got canceled. At that period of time, it came back later, but at that period of time, it got canceled. So Gene, who also happened to be a writer for Bob Hope, then recommended me to Bob Hope. And he gave me an assignment. I wrote up some jokes. He got them to Bob. And then I waited to hear back. And then one night, late at night, it was after 11, and I get the phone rings, I get this call, and it's Bob Hope. So he told me that he really liked my work and gave me some more topics to write. And then I continued to write for him, and eventually came on staff as his first woman staff writer, and got to be with him 15 years through the 80s and the 90s until the end. So what an amazing time, and so many stories and so many opportunities that came up as a result of that. But I'm going to share some of the memories. Writing for Bob, that's one of his cue cards that I'm standing in front of, that first one, and one of my jokes on it. And what happened was my husband surprised me on one of our anniversaries, and he got Bob Hope to sign. He had to find the cue card that had my, some of the cue cards that had my joke on it, and then he had all the writers sign it to me, and then Bob as well. So that's a pretty special souvenir that I've got hanging in my office. And then next to me is Barney McNulty, and he's the guy that invented cue cards. So that's us there in the backstage of NBC. Now, writing for Bob, it was very a training ground for fast writing. He taught me how to write fast, because so many things that he would do a show for, so often he wanted to have up to the last minute whatever was happening in the news, or if something was happening in that town, he wanted to be able to joke about it. So we'd get the call, and you had to get it back sometimes very fast, like within 5 minutes, and that sort of thing. Now, one of the fastest writing assignments we had was when Bob was going to a psychiatrist convention, and we had written all the material. It just seemed to be an easy assignment, and we wrote all the jokes. But when Bob got to the venue, he found out that it wasn't a psychiatrist convention, it was a chiropractor's convention. So this is just before he's going on stage, and we had to write all new material for him. So he took it and went on stage, and everything went well. Another time, we would get a lot of calls at night, late at night. So that 11 o'clock call that I got from Bob was something that was going to be part of my life for 15 years. But he had this one writer that when he called his house, his wife didn't have the heart to wake him up, because it had been especially busy, a lot of work, and she looked over at her husband, and he was sleeping soundly. So when Bob called and he said, "Is your husband there?" She thought for a moment, and then she thought, well, then she started talking, and she said, "Well, no, Bob, he told me he was going to be with you tonight." So there was this pause, and then Bob said, "Oh yeah, here he comes now." So Bob was a pretty quick thinker. Now, how we did it, we would work individually on the topics. He would give us whatever was, he'd wake up and read the newspaper, and then whatever topics that jumped out at him, he'd call us with them, his list. Or he would call us and say, what have you read in the news? And send me some topics, and then he'd pick from that. And in the days before Bob got a fax machine, which was pretty late in the game, we would have to drive to his house, and he was about a half hour from my house. So we would drive, and sometimes there was one time where I went, I think it was 3 trips, the half hour for 3 trips. And, back, you'd get home, and then there'd be another assignment on your answering machine, and you'd have to go drive that in, and then there'd be you'd come back and there was something else, and then you'd have to drive that in. Well, on this one trip, I was taking material in, and his dog Snow Job is, I think that first dog in the foreground there is Snow Job, I believe. And he came up as I was walking out. He came up and just kind of, was sniffing around my foot, and he's smelling my fear, I'm sure. But just before I could move or do anything, he just bit me right there on the top of the foot. And, it hurt. And I, ended up, going and getting this, getting it taken care of, etc. But Bob was leaving that day. And so he sent me a telegram from the road that said, "Dear Martha, please come back soon. I'm ready for another hors d'oeuvre. Love, Snow Job." So that was one of his letters to me. That I've got a lot of those kinds of things, and got it framed and put up on my wall. It was such an incredible journey of writing for him. There's made lots of great memories. On the the next slide has some of them. This is Gene, the gentleman I was telling you about, and me at NBC, backstage at NBC. And then the upper right is on the day of the dedication of his 4th Hollywood Walk of Fame star. And so that was a special day in his life, and a fun day for all of us to go. The bottom photograph is at his Palm Springs home, and we were taping a TV special there, which was a lot of fun. And then with Bob, working for Bob, what was one of the things that was so incredible was the crowd he ran in. If we'd get a line change that needed to happen, we'd be called into the dressing room, Bob's dressing room, to pitch whatever lines we had to replace other lines. And there, Bob would be in the makeup chair, and you not only had him, but else, in the room as well. You'd have people like Lucille Ball, Milton Berle, Danny Thomas, just whoever was on the show, plus all those legends. Plus you'd have the hottest stars of the day. Now this is Bob and me with he was dressed as George Washington. This was a George Washington sketch that was in one of the television specials. And then another major legend, well, here we go, there's some more. This is Linda Hope up at the top left, and she's the eldest daughter of Bob and Dolores, and she's also my co-author on the book. And when I start to talk about the book, I'll tell more of Linda's story. And then this is another writer up at the right corner, Hal Cantor, and in the middle is me and Dolores Hope, and a wonderful, wonderful lady. Bob probably couldn't have gotten so much accomplished and so much done in life, especially with the military and so many other his charities and things that he would do. She was a great part of that. And then down below are 2 writers, Gene Parrott, Bob Mills, and then on the right is Philip Lasker, and then we're all standing around the Bob's chair, and this is one of his assistants in the middle, and then Philip's wife, Suzanne. And then down below, this was at a tribute after Bob had already passed, but it was a tribute to him that we attended, and Yogi Berra was there, and good supporter of Bob Hope as well. And then the next slide, I believe, is George Burns. This is Jeffrey Barron, another writer, and George Burns, and then Jean and myself. And this picture we took at one of the tapings, and we just, because George was George, we all wanted to get our picture taken with him. So we went into George's dressing room for this. And after the picture was taken, George turned to us all and he said, you work for the nicest man in show business, which I thought was a pretty good tribute to him. Now, when we would do the shows, we'd stand on these, especially when he was doing the monologue. If it was one of our jokes that he did, we would tend to nudge the writer that was standing next to us on the side of the stage, and especially if it played well. If it played well, they got the nudge. If it didn't play well, then we just would look around and like we had nothing to do with that joke and not necessarily claim it. But it was fun to experience all that, and just to go through the whole process. When we'd get the call, we'd each write our own individual monologue jokes, and then we would drive them to his house. And for the shows, it would work different on the shows. We would get together at his house, and Bob in his home office there, which was almost the size of another house, but we'd all meet with him and discuss what kind of sketches and whatnot, what kind of theme the show would have, sketch ideas that would go along with that. And then Bob would be there as well, and then all of us writers. And it was always a fun time. Bob was a great, just coming up with jokes as were all the writers. So it was not unlike Dick Van Dyke too much. We would joke around like that a lot. And then we'd go home, and each of us, whatever sketch idea got picked, and several of them, usually there was several, then we'd go home and write our own individual version of it. And then Bob would cut and paste. Sometimes he took the whole sketch, and then other times he would take some of this person's and some of that person's and put it all together. And then we'd meet then for the taping at NBC, and that could go on the whole weekend or over a span of several days, 2 or 3 days for sure. And then it would get all put together, and then his monologue for the shows, they would often be around 45 minutes, 50 minutes. They would go on it was quite entertaining for the audience. But then he would pare that down to see, what the television audience would see. It would get pared down, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 15, whatever it turned out to be, but it would be far less than what the studio audience got to see. One of my favorite memories is when he had his 90th birthday. He always had a birthday show every year. So when he had his 90th birthday show, we did a huge television special, 3 hours, and everybody was on it, including different presidents and all the legends, and it was just a very memorable evening. But Dolores also threw a private party at her house for 500 or so of Bob's best friends. So it was really an incredible evening, and everybody was there, including two presidents. And we just, it was such a great memory. And I wanted to get my picture. We had talked already with Gerald Ford, President Gerald Ford, but I wanted to, I had wished I had gotten a picture, but there was still time because President Reagan was there as well. So when they gave the call to dinner, I was walking, along the pathway to this big white tent that they had set up where the dinner was going to be. And I just happened to look up, and there was Ronald Reagan walking right in front of me. And I normally don't do this sort of thing, but I wanted to get a picture. So I asked him, I interrupted his walk and asked if he would mind taking a picture with me. And he was so gracious that he goes, no, not at all, So we posed, and it was getting dark. It was getting pretty dark already by this time. But we posed, and my husband took the picture, but the flash did not go off. So I was so disappointed. But he was very kind and said, would you like to try it again? So I said, you don't mind? And he said, no, not at all. So we posed again. My husband took the picture again, and the flash did not go off again. So I thanked him, and he was very, apologetic, but he went on to dinner. Well, the next day, I took the camera in to get developed the film, and I was just hoping that something turned out, because it was dark, but you never know. So I was hoping, but it didn't turn out. It was just a black negative. But I enlarged it and framed it and hung it on my wall because I know it's me and the president. So it just was so many memories like that, in fact, I think I have so what happened? Wait, so what happened? Yeah, I was telling that story in one of my talks at an event, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, so did you ever get that picture? And I said, no, I had my 2 chances and I blew it. Well, he hands me his card, and he just happened to be the president's son. So the next week, I think it was, I get a call from the president's office inviting not only me, but me and my entire family down to his office to get our pictures taken with him. He took a picture of me with him, my husband with him, each one of our sons with him, and then the whole group of us together. So it turned out way better than the picture that I had tried to take, how that would have turned out. So that's my never give up story. You never know how it's going to turn out. So it's working with Bob. It was so hard, easy to forget who he was because he was so nice. It was like he was your uncle. He just was a kind man. But you would be reminded of who he was. You'd go to these events in a football stadium. They'd have the marching band, doing something in his honor, and airplanes flying over in his honor. So you got reminded who he was. And this is when they dedicated the Spirit of Bob Hope. This is one of the things that was named after him. And he's had buildings named after him. He's had streets named after him. There was one, they changed the street that's right in front of NBC to Bob Hope Drive. And at that dedication, one of the lines I wrote was, it's nice to have a street named after me, especially since all the oceans were taken. So you kind of get the idea of he's a pretty honored man. In fact, the Guinness Book of World Records named him the most honored and most awarded entertainer in history. And, he has the room full of awards to prove that. They are now all, a lot divided up into different museums, and the Library of Congress, different places has his artifacts. And so you know that he indeed was the most honored entertainer. So how did the book come about? For Bob, it started at March Field, May 6, 1941. He had been doing his show. He had a hit show. He was a celebrity. He was a star of films. But his producer, Al Capstaff, suggested that he go to a military base and put on his show. Now, what Bob didn't know is that Al's brother was stationed there, so he had a little bit of an ulterior motive. But Bob, gave the okay and said, okay, I'll do it, not really knowing, what to expect. So when he went, he fell in love with this audience. It was such a great audience, and he just loved their laughter. It was like they had been waiting for him all their life, and he waiting for them. So when at that time, though, America wasn't in the war, but after Pearl Harbor was bombed, then Bob was approached to become the encourager of the troops, to keep their morale up and to be the entertainer that had that responsibility. And he took it on. He had wanted to enlist, but Roosevelt felt that this was the better way to use his talents. Now, in the war, at the height of the war, the G.I.s were mailing him 38,000 fan letters a week. That's what he was receiving. So he was the mailman's nightmare and G.I. Joe's hero. Now, this is one of the letters that came because a lot of them didn't know where to send the letters. They didn't have an address. So they would either send it to NBC or Pepsodent or one of the other companies. But then this one came to Bob, location doubtful, but probably near Hollywood, California, Hope. And it got to him. These letters would get to him. He was a little bit like Santa Claus, where all you had to do is put his name on there and the letter would find him. So how the letters, the idea for the book for the letters. Now, this is when Bob was alive, they were at his house, and Linda Hope, she grew up with them. So, and she even did a high school report on these letters, because she'd asked the secretary, Marjorie Hughes, who was orchestrating all this of saving these letters. She had asked her what was in these boxes. And so Marjorie told her that's history. And I got to look at the letters when we were working on the shows, and I discovered how much history was on this. Not only was it just amazing, a remarkable journey through World War II, but it was also a look inside Bob's heart. And for that, I thought it was just incredible. So I called Bob, this was back when he was alive, and I asked if he had ever thought about putting these letters into a book. And Bob, was interested, but he said he didn't think he could do it because the letters were so close to him. So he suggested I talk with Linda, who was also interested in these letters. And so we talked, and we started having meetings and working on the book, and got a good deal into it. And then unfortunately, Bob passed away. But a few years ago, I got an email from Linda that said, asking me if I was still interested in that book, finishing it up. So I was so excited because I didn't know where it stood at that time. And so we started working on it again. And now at that time, I had moved out of state to Tennessee, but the letters were now up at the Library of Congress, which made it easier for me to get to them. And I would go up there and finish my research. And it was just, and continued writing the book as well. Now, these were not they weren't ordinary fan letters. Each one, what's so remarkable about these letters too is how they would address him. It wouldn't be Dear Mr. Hope. So many of them would be Dear Pal, Dear Buddy, Dear Dad. Some of them wanted him to adopt them. But most of them were Dear Bob. It was such a friendly basis. And one of the hardest things about writing the book, it was getting to deciding which letters to pick. There were so many to go through and so many that you wanted to include, but we had the challenge of keeping the book at a certain length. So we would put all the letters together, and then we'd realize it was too long, and then we'd take some out, and then we'd find some that, oh no, that has to go in. We gotta, we can't lose that one, or we'd find a new one, and we'd want to put that one in. So it was going up and down with the size of the book. Now, one of the interesting things that Bob did, and these were so many letters that would be in there, was a different, either the soldier or the mothers would write to Bob thanking him, because what had happened was when Bob would be visiting where they were at, if a soldier could get close enough to Bob, then they would slip him their mother's phone number, asking him to call their mom and let her know that they had seen her boy overseas and that he was okay. And when Bob got home, and this is from after a grueling journey getting home, and after the tour, he was already probably tired from the tour, and he would come home and sit on the phone and make call after call, calling these moms to deliver a good word. And sometimes the soldier may not have been in such great health, but he would tell Bob to save to just say that to their mom that he saw them and that they were doing good. Now, how we divided the book was on the different topics that would come up. And so in the section, there was one section that was the different souvenirs that the soldiers would send Bob. And there was some that were like, they would find things, especially like a photograph of a look-alike, or if it was themselves, which is the next slide, I believe they would send the picture. And this was one of the soldiers that happened to look like Bob. And the soldier wrote, "Dear Ski Nose Hope, after seeing an enclosed picture of myself, I have decided to commit Harry-Carry, but then maybe I ought to change my mind and sue you for scaring my mother." So there was a lot of lookalikes from either Bob, that lookalikes of Bob or lookalikes of Bing, and it just would make Bob's day, and he would write back and joke around with them. And there was letters that talked about loss. Not only were they're funny letters, but of course there were letters that would make you cry. And this one story, I get to it here. This is one of the stories that chokes me up every time I read it. But "Dear Bob, I'm writing to you because my husband was one of the soldiers you brought a little of home to in Sicily. It was the only entertainment he had during the 9 months of active service overseas. And now he will never see any other. Yes, I mean that he was killed in action. He didn't die a hero. He never did anything spectacular, He just did his duties as best he could. His name will never go down in history as being great, and yet he was to me, and I'm very proud of him. I received a letter from his commanding officer telling me what happened. It seems that night of March 17th, they were on the front line at Anzio, waiting to be relieved. Pete, my husband, was out of his foxhole, checking on the men in his platoon to see that they were ready to leave the minute the relieving unit arrived. Before he could get back to his foxhole, the Germans fired several rounds of artillery. One hit close to Pete, and several pieces of shrapnel lodged in Pete's chest. I'm told that he died instantly. Pete, or Staff Sergeant Melvin E. Peterson, was one of the finest men that ever lived, and he will always live in the minds and hearts of his friends and loved ones. My husband was like millions of others. He didn't want to leave home and go to war, but there was a job to do, and he was never one to shirk, so he went fearfully. I wrote to you because my husband wrote me of the show he saw with you and Miss Langford. You seem like a friend, and you saw him since I did. I guess that's why I've told you all about it. The G.I.s and Bob had such a close relationship, and I think it started back at Marchfield, and it started with him thinking they were a great audience, and he just was overwhelmed, as any comic would be if you had an audience that was that responsive to your material. But his relationship with the G.I.s went far beyond that. After year after year, engagement after engagement, after seeing these boys up close and personal, and they were boys, so many of them, and women were young. They were 18, 19 years old, and it just they got into his heart. That's the only, you read these letters and you see it, that they got into his heart. And this is a photograph of the 200th appearance with the G.I.s, and they, lifted him up on his shoulders, and the G.I.s just loved him, and he loved them right back. There was one of the letters that told of a story where this one company of guys and troops had gone to see the show, and they had walked miles to get there. And by the time they got there, they couldn't get close enough to really see or hear much. It was so many thousands and thousands of troops there already. So they turned around and started walking back. And word of that got to Bob. And after the show, he got in a Jeep with some of the others and went out and found them on the road, these troops, and parked and put on a private show just for these guys that had missed it. And that was what he was known for. He would put on a show either in the back of a Jeep or up on a truck, or if he heard of a group that was out a little distance away and they couldn't make it to the show, he would make sure that he went over there too. After his regular show, he'd go over there. Now the G.I.s couldn't get enough of his radio program, as you can see here. These are them hiding. This is if there was a curfew and they couldn't stay up to listen to the show, and they would hide under the blankets. They've got a radio under there, and they're getting the show with trying not to be caught, but their superior snuck a picture of them anyway. But Bob was a bringer of hope and home. One of another letter that I'll read is says that beautifully. Hi, friend. He addressed it, friend. I remember the first night I spent on Iwo Jima. I said my prayers, and I imagined I could see my little girl getting into bed, even though the Japanese were hitting us with their mortars. At this time, I was done dug in beside the body of a buddy of mine, Gunny Sergeant J. Basilone. But all I could think of was home. Later on in the operation, I came across a fellow from Indianapolis. He had been hit with mortar fragments. While I was dressing his wounds, of which there were many, also giving him plasma, believe it or not, he was talking about home. When we put him aboard a track to evacuate him, he said, well, at least I'm headed for home. This story is true, Bob, and I guess he is home by now. I have been transferred to the 2nd Division now and sure hope to get home soon. That's all for now, only I hope the people back home hold up their end of the bargain as good as we held up ours. One of your fans, Harry. The World War II shows had a lot of photographic memories, and this is Bob with Francis Langford. And the next one is some of those amazing crowds. In the back of the book, we list some of the crowd sizes that Bob entertained, and all the shows aren't listed there, but there's so many more that he did, and impromptu ones, and but he would just stand there and just deliver his material. Now, an interesting thing about that is Bob would often get new material handed to him by his writers right there at the last moment. And he would go right out on stage. And this is before cue cards were invented. So he would just go right on stage and no notes and just deliver these new jokes that had been custom written for the location he was in. So I've seen him do that during the time that I was with him as well. We'd hand him jokes and he'd walk on stage and just deliver them. So I personally think he might have had like a photographic memory to be able to do that as well as he did, but he just loved entertaining the troops. And then one of the things that he always made sure of is visiting the hospitals. He would go out to the soldiers that were in the hospital. And this is a few pictures that are in the book. This is him with the soldiers, and he would entertain it. Here we go. He doesn't even need a stage. He'd sing wherever he could. They'd bring in, like here, they brought over the piano, and he'd just put on a show right there for the G.I.s. He would do that. He would do that a lot. Another letter was this one that he would, and here's the actual letter there. Dear Bob, even though it is a little difficult to write to you in an upside down position, I felt it the least I could do to show my appreciation for making me a little more comfortable while I lie here on my back in a traction bed. My neck is in a halter with a weight attached, and it has been this way for the past 2 weeks when I met with an accident. I had to come back from 18 months foreign duty without anything happening, and now this. So you can, the letter goes on, but I just thought it would be interesting to see the actual letter there for us. Another letter talked of a soldier. Let me get to it. That had seen the show and and it was his friend, and he was writing to Bob, Mr. Hope, and this is something that Bob would do. He would send, not only write back to the soldiers, but he'd also put them on his Christmas list, and he'd send them Christmas cards. Mr. Hope, received the Christmas card you sent me and thought it was swell. Thanks, old man. I appreciate it a lot. Brother, if them words would only come true, a homeward bound new year. No doubt you remember the picture I have enclosed of Harry G. Ray. He was one of my best friends in the company. He was killed in action against the enemy. Thanks again for the wonderful Christmas card, a Marine. And this is, Harry had been brought up on stage to dance with Patty Thomas. And unfortunately, he lost his life. And Bob wrote back, "Dear Charlie, came across your letter the other night when I sat down to look over my GI mail for the past few months. Sorry I haven't managed to answer you before this, but I've been been on the go all season, one tour after another. So sorry to hear about Harry Ray. He was a swell kid. Here's hoping this mess will be cleared up before too long, and you'll have a homeward bound new year before this year is over. Good luck." Bob also faced danger himself, and sometimes there would be incoming that would hit too close to the stage, or different things that would happen. Now here, he was flying in. This happened in Australia, and he was going there, and he had asked the pilot if he could, let him try to fly the plane. So he did, and then just shortly after that, one of the engines went out. So the pilot took over, but what they had to do is they had to do a water landing, and this was in Lorryton, and they had to do a water landing like Captain Sully, and they brought the plane down in the water, and the whole troop was on the plane. So they brought it down in the water, and he found out later that had the plane not hit the water first, had it hit the one of the sandbars, it probably would have somersaulted and exploded. So he came very, very close to not making it out of that situation. Now, what happened is they rescued them, and they went into town, and Bob tried to send a telegram with the postmaster, but the postmaster didn't recognize him. So he thought, he said, "I'm too busy for your jokes, young man." And so Bob had to keep trying to convince him. He finally did, and Bob even ended up borrowing 11 pounds from the postmaster to get a room and food while they were there. And the town were so excited that Hollywood had dropped out of the sky on them. This was a small little town of 600 people. And they were so excited, so they talked them into putting on a show just for them. And so they put it on, and not only did they have the show, but they all did the hokey pokey until 4 o'clock in the morning. And even Bob, after that, he would send the townspeople Christmas cards for years and years. And they even hold a festival celebrating the day when Hollywood came down upon them. So it was a pretty interesting story, and it's all in the book with more pictures of that. Now, one of the misconceptions of Bob is that he was sure he was involved with the G.I.s, but he was no fan of war. He wanted, as you could tell in these letters, he wanted to be there for the troops. That was the promise that he had made, to be there for the troops. And Roosevelt, when he talked to him about doing this, he had no idea. He was asking him for World War II. He had no idea that Bob was going to take it to every war and every engagement in his lifetime. He would be there, and not only during the wars, but in peace as well. His last military show that he gave was when he was 87 years old. he was at that age, he was crawling in and out of helicopters. He was facing the same incoming and as a lot of the troops were. He was saying goodbye to Dolores. We don't know if this was, he was coming or going, but his family was, they were just as supportive as, they could have been. They stood by him and believed in his mission. And he believed in his cause. He was a man on a mission, and he would have kept going beyond 87 if he could have, but that wasn't to be, and he ended up to the sadness of the world. That news came that Bob Hope had died, and the whole world was shocked. But the one that was the most shocked was Bob, because he was in his kitchen having breakfast and pouring himself another cup of coffee. So what had happened was they had, what happens with a lot of celebrities, they'll write the obituary ahead of time so that they're prepared. And somehow Bob's got leaked to the press. So it went out, and then it just kept moving up the channels. It went to Congress, and one of the representatives announced it to Congress that Bob Hope had died. Well, a day or so later, Bob told his publicist, he called him up and he said, it's still early and I haven't had my coffee yet. Would you read the paper and tell me, am I alive or dead? So Bob had such a good sense of humor about all the things that happened to him. Sadly, though, his death did come at 100 years of age in 2003. And even at 100, we lost him too soon. As one soldier put it, Bob Hope lifted our chins up off our belt buckles. And that's what he did for all of us. And here's just a reminder of some of his service. It's the video if you want to.
So Bob looked into the face of war, and he knew that the horror of it could never be really washed away by belly laughter. And he told us what he felt.
I've seen some great acts of achievement in the past few years. The G.I. in New Guinea, the kid in the Aleutians. I saw a boy in a hospital in Espirito Santos lying in a bed, taking on a quart of blood plasma. This skinny American hero looked up, smiled, said, "That feels good." 2 hours later, they told us that boy died. And there's Salerno and Saipan in North Africa and Guadalcanal, and aircraft carriers that went down dragging battleships and destroyers and Nazi subs and planes along with them. Little jungle clearings and road crossings and creeks and rivers without names. The achievement of capturing those places took more than perseverance and intelligence. It took blood and missing limbs and blinded eyes and shattered nerves and ruined lives. And in this show, the biggest show of them all, the manager doesn't have to hang out the standing room only sign because, mister, when this show is over, some of the audience won't be standing. So we've been throughout Alaska and Africa and the Mediterranean and all over the Pacific, to all those places where no kid would be if our country wasn't fighting for its life. I'd like to thank every kid in uniform for the honor of working for him.
War, that strange democracy of misery, created a comradeship between men unknown in times of peace. And slowly, painfully, the relationship between comedian and soldier took root, a bond of understanding which has never been broken.
And I'd like to end with a piece out of the book. Bob Hope was given the Medal of Merit by President Dwight Eisenhower, the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Lyndon Johnson, the Congressional Medal of Honor by President John Kennedy, the Foundation Freedom Award by President Ronald Reagan, the National Medal of Arts by President Bill Clinton, and was named the first honorary veteran of the United States Armed Forces by an act of Congress in 1997. His honors and awards would almost fill a book themselves or a museum. As it turns out, his career artifacts, awards, and memories are spread out in several museums and halls of fame. He was given 54 honorary doctorates, not bad for a high school dropout. He was an extraordinary version of the everyday man and proof of how far someone can go with a healthy sense of humor, boundless drive, and singleness of purpose. That was Bob Hope, my boss for 15 years, an amazing, amazing human being. And at this time, we'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Martha. I really appreciate the presentation. It's a very, very powerful story. And we do have some questions that came through chat. And if anybody else has questions, please put them into the chat so we can bring them on. But I'm just curious off the bat, do you know how many letters are in the archive? Is there a number on that?
I don't know the total number. Some I'm sure didn't make it through the years just because of things that happened, but there's a lot when you look at the boxes down the hallway, and then there's other offices that'll have the other containers with them all. It's pretty amazing. It's thousands and thousands and thousands.
Well, we're going to bring on our first question. Comes from Saul Grossman. Saul, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question. I think you're on, Saul, if you can hear us. Are you there? Well, basically, his question is, how early in his career did Bob Hope decide to hire writers? Do you know sort of the history?
Oh, very early, very early. He started realizing when he was making it more as an MC, he was doing a lot of dancing and had dance partners that he would perform with. But when he started making it as an MC, he started realizing his need for writers, because up until that point, he had been using some different joke books, and he would get material out of that. And but he really enjoyed the topical material, the talking about things in the news, talking about things in the area. So he saw the need to hire writers, because he would be on the road. So he was a funny guy, and he was very witty, but to sit down and come up with new material at the speed that he was using it up, he needed to have a staff of writers. And he loved the process so much that he would be coming home from a tour overseas or whatnot, and a grueling flight, and he would barely land, and he'd call us on the phone and said, okay, what are we going to do next time for the next show? He loved the process. He loved to get together, talk about the show. He loved to know that we were all writing and turning in jokes. He just loved it. He was just energized by it. So I think he liked employing writers just to have the laughter and the experience of all of us in the room together.
Our next question kind of ties to that as well. Francis Greasing, if I'm sorry, I may have gotten your last name wrong, but you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I just wondered what percentage of the jokes that he wrote, approximately.
Well, I mean, in the early days, I'm sure a great percentage, and then you know, like I was saying, as time went on, he didn't have the time, although he would ad lib a lot. And then if it was a good ad lib, it stayed in the act. So it just depended on how much free time he had, but he would come up with them once in a while. But he loved working with a writing staff, and he was one of the comedians, Hollywood comedians that really employed a great staff of writers that were loyal and stuck with him through the years, and he was loyal as well. If you turned in your work and you know, he liked it, then he kept you. Most of us were with him many, many years.
Next question comes from Linda Rashka. Linda, if you'd like to unmute yourself. There you go.
How old were you when you started writing, and were there many women doing the same kind of work?
Well, there were some women. I was his first woman staff writer, but there were other shows that had women writers. So it was starting to happen more and more. You know, sometimes it would be groundbreaking when a woman, you know, got a staff job. But other times, it just depended on the situation. Now, when I came on, I was probably 29, 30, something like that, I believe. And just, I didn't feel any different than the guys I was working with. It was a team of really encouraging guys that had been with him a lot of years. There were several that went back to radio with him. So I loved hearing the stories, and they were so encouraging at welcoming me in and bringing me into the meetings and bringing me into the dressing room, you know, for line changes, and taking me up on stage to talk with the different guest stars. And I found them very helpful and guiding me as I grew into this career. I tend to hold myself back. I'm more of a shy person, and you know, without their encouragement, I don't know, you know, how far, if I would have gotten discouraged or what. But they were very encouraging, and I owe them so much.
Our next question. Sorry, I got caught here. Karen Coughlin. Karen, I'm gonna, whoops, sorry. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question, Karen.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi. I was fascinated by the entire presentation. Did you ever get to go overseas with Mr. Hope?
No, not overseas. I had 3 little kids at the time, so he was aware of that, and we usually had the head writer or one of the other guys would go with him on different jaunts. We did some shows that were on location, and I would go to those. And you know, so that was. I wrote for them when he was overseas, and I had, you know, fax it into him or call it into him, the different materials. So it was like you were there. But I would have liked to. I would have liked to have gone to at least one, but I understood, you know, all the reasons.
Well, thank you. It's been wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And another question, I think you brought this up earlier, but what years did you work for Bob Hope? What 15 years segment?
Well, it started in, I think it was the late 82, 83, and then it went beyond, you know, into the late 90s. It went beyond the last military show when he was 87, but he still did a few after that. And then there were events after that as well, where he was being honored, or he, you know, needed some writing for those kind of events. So it went into the late 90s.
Our next question comes from Susan Labowitz. Susan, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, Martha, I love the presentation also. I was wondering whether you ever did any stand-up.
Well, you know, it's funny. I've done talks like this or banquets and roasting when I would roast the pastor and the different business people. So I've done that. I've thought about it at times, but then I really would have to get over a lot of shyness to get up there and just start doing it. But my where I really feel most comfortable is writing, and I've really made a long career out of it, and it is where I feel the most confident and feel like it's a fit. This is what I'm supposed to do, is write. And if I started competing with that and doing too much on stage, then I think I would lose what I really am meant to do, which I believe is right. I started writing when I was 9, and it just has always been with me. I didn't think it'd be a career, but it has turned into one, and I feel like it's just a perfect fit. Hard to explain, but I feel it wouldn't be a perfect fit if I went outside of that too much. I don't mind doing it, but I don't want to lose the writing. I love the writing.
Our next question is from Georgina Burba. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Georgina.
Okay.
You are there.
Yeah. Oh, I wonder if he ever had a spot in Las Vegas.
Well, he would perform up there. I believe we went up and saw him once performing up there. I'd have to check that. But yeah, he would perform up there for different things, and a lot of times a friend of his would have something up there, and then he'd do something. But yeah.
The real quick while we queue up our next question, I'm kind of curious, as a writer, do you still find yourself kind of looking at the news every day and thinking about what the joke might be of today?
Oh yeah. Wait, and I've talked with the other writers as well, and we all say that you hear topics that, oh, that would be a Bob Hope topic, oh, that would be a Bob would be commenting on that, or different things like that. And yeah, it's amazing how much material we all turned in throughout our lives and wrote for him. Pretty incredible amount of jokes and amount of sketches, and just the volume of work. He kept us busy. He definitely kept us busy.
Our next question is from Nancy Dixon. Nancy, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay. You mentioned he was a high school dropout. We haven't heard anything much about his early life before we know the Bob Hope we all know. What was his life like early then, if he dropped out of high school? What did he do?
Well, he would joke. He would joke about different. I think he was boundless in his energy, so I'm sure he was a challenge, in school and with his parents and whatnot. But he was an entertainer. It's one of those personalities where you're the center of attention, and as it turned out, he put it to good use, and I'm sure it could have gone another way, trying to get attention in all the wrong places, but he put it to good use and did a great service for the
So
whole
he
world.
really got into this. He got into this right after dropping out of high school then.
Well, around 19, when he was 19 or 20, he started in vaudeville, and you know, stayed pretty busy, just moving from one thing to another and feeling out what was going to work for him. But there was one time when he, Linda shares the story in the book where, you know, there was a time when he was down on his luck and didn't have money to really eat, and was walking in Chicago and stopped at a restaurant that were, you know, he called them swells, where the swells were eating. And he's starving and looking through the window at all this good food. Well, years later, he's flying over Chicago in his own airplane. And he calls Linda over to the window to look out. And he says, see that down there? We're gonna be coming up on Chicago. And she says, you know, Dad, I can't see anything. It's all dark out there. And he goes, well, it's coming up. And you know what happened in Chicago? And so he tells her this story of being, you know, hungry and looking in this window. And he says, and now here I am flying above it in my own airplane. And he says, you know, only in America could something like this happen. And he knew that he had been blessed and, you know, had a life of just opportunities that came his way. It wasn't all good. You know, he was hungry at that time, but just hanging on and just kept perfecting his craft. And then also he kept giving back. He couldn't give back enough. He just kept giving back. The charities that he supported, the military, he just was a person that gave everything back, and he gave everything he had in him, talent and energy and whatever he could do for other people. He just gave it back, and then it came back to him in so many ways.
And a follow-up, I'm going to put a link to Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation, their website, bobhope.org, but there's a lot of great material that I discovered on their website too that talks about his early life, including the fact that I didn't realize he was born in England. Which
oh yeah. He said he came over when he was 4, and he said he left England when he found out he couldn't be king. So yeah, he was definitely had been born there and spent his first four years there. That's why he could never be president. A lot of people think that had he ran, he probably would have made it, you know. But he said he decided not to be president because Dolores didn't want to move to a smaller house.
Well, I want to share a little bit about your writing too. You've kind of seem to have a little niche of writing books for people that over 50 and the like. And I'm going to read a few of your titles off because they're just, the titles alone, I think, are worth the books. But forgettable jokes for older folks, jokes you wish you could remember about things you thought you'd never forget. It's always darkest before the fridge door opens, enjoying the fruits of middle age. Didn't my skin used to fit? Growing your own turtleneck and other benefits of aging. Cooking with hot flashes and other ways to make middle age profitable. So tell us a little bit about your writing to this audience.
Well, I started writing a book a year for a while. Not that that was my goal, but it just happened that way. And then a few years I did 2 a year, and then a couple I did 3, I think. So over time, I've been at it a long time, and over time it adds up. So you blink and then you've written 88 now. So
pretty amazing. Well, we really appreciate the presentation. There's a lot of kudos in the chat and people thanking you so much for your time and for this amazing work. And I'm curious on the letters, did you say they are in the Smithsonian Archive?
They're in the Library of Congress.
Library of Congress.
A lot of his artifacts and different things have been spread out over different museums and, different places where you can see them. But there's so many facets to his career that he just was unique that way, that I don't think anybody could even come close to what he accomplished in so many areas. He went to the top of every single field, Broadway, radio, television, movies. And then that's not even including, the military, and then all of his charitable work. And he just lived his entire 100 years, just packed it full.
Well, it's only appropriate, I guess, to say thanks for the memories. And we really appreciate your time again and for your effort to preserve this information. And I can only imagine what those letters all look and feel like. And it just must have been an amazing experience to write this book.
It was. And I hope those of you who can get your hands on it, that you enjoy it. And it's an emotional roller coaster. So I think you'll learn a lot about Bob Hope. It's hard.
Well, thank you again, and appreciate everybody for joining us. And just a reminder, we'll be back next week with our next speaker series on the same time with Frank Figluzzi. And Martha, again, wonderful presentation, and we hope to see you again at Ollie.
Okay, well, I look forward to it. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a great week at Ollie. Great summer. Bye-bye.